I can take 10. I can take 20. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the return yet again, of the EDHTakes podcast. We say that a lot. This time, the absence was a bit more significant.
Yeah.
If you've been paying attention. It's just been a busy year, so I apologize for that. I am Elijah Samuelson.
And I'm Spencer Cook.
And we're happy to be back with what I think is hopefully a good topic for today. Something that is often discussed in Commander is the idea of things like threat assessment and what was the play. What is the play? I never know. No. I have to just like look at Spencer and copy what he's doing most of the time and learn through other people. But yeah, it is a tough question, Spencer. But today we'd like to discuss how the objectively correct thing is rarely obvious, and that's something that I think in multiplayer Magic like Commander, it's often very hard to say if something was objectively correct or incorrect.
Yeah, and you mentioned how the objectively correct play is rarely obvious, and I think we, or at least myself, is going to try to make the point that the objectively correct play is often impossible to ascertain because of just a lot of factors. But we'll get to that later, I suppose. So yeah, just to start off here, Eli, I think a lot of people like to think that they know the objectively correct play, or they're playing in a game and they're like, oh, you misplayed for sure. Like 100% you should have done this. And it's often not that simple, right?
Yeah, I'm envious of people when they're clearly very confident in themselves. But it can be frustrating when you play with somebody and they're often super confident, not only that they're doing the right thing, but you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah, especially when they're trying to make a statement about your play when they don't have the same information that you have. Like, Commander or Magic in general is a game about hidden information. And like they can't really, there's so many factors that they don't have, access to for them to be able to make a matter-of-fact statement about whether you did the right play or did the wrong play. Like, they can't see your hand. They don't know maybe all the cards in your deck. They don't know the thought processes that you're going on, stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, you come from more of a competitive Magic background, right, Spencer? Mm-hmm. I mean, I've played my share of Limited and, one draft, didn't like pre-releases, and I played Standard for a little while. But the edges in that game often just come down to who's better at concealing the hidden information, right? Because you can make the correct play on the board state, what you can see, but the edges in that are determined based off of your ability to bluff things, right?
Well, yeah, especially in Limited, bluffing is a really big deal because they might like in Limited, you don't really know the contents of each other's decks, so you kind of have to play around, what is sort of like what the format has. So you play around like the good commons, like the common removal, the combat tricks, and stuff like that. And then once you see them in like the first game of a Limited game, then you play around them more in the future, and then you can knowing that, you can like bluff that you might have them even though you don't. But in Commander, being that it's like a single player format, a single card format, a singleton format with a lot less, options and stuff like that, it's a lot harder to bluff things in Commander, I feel. Or maybe it's a lot harder to for other people to fall for bluffs.
It's hard to guess what people will have, and yeah, it's you don't want to always just assume that your opponents have stuff in Commander. There's just so much more to it than that. It's too much to keep track of, almost.
Yeah, and you mentioned competitive formats like constructed formats like Standard or Modern. A lot of the skill in those games, besides knowing how your deck plays, is having like an understanding of the format. And usually if you're playing against like a deck at a high level, probably 55 of the 60 cards in their deck. Or, you have an understanding of what their deck is doing and like pretty much the exact cards or ratios in their list. So that's not really the case for, a casual format like Commander. You don't necessarily know every card in your opponent's deck, unless, of course, you've played against them before and they're your friend. But
yeah, so I think due to that, you get this mentality in Commander of people only wanting to make decisions and assess threats based on the known information, the things you can see. People will say stuff like, look at the board state, or you've got the board state, so I can do this action against you, and it makes sense. Like, it's like a clear-cut thing that's always obvious what's going on there, and who you should be attacking or who you should be using removal on. And I think I have to disagree with that in Commander.
Yeah, it's very hard to boil down a Commander game to just look at the board state, Eli. I know you're someone who has been pretty outspoken in the past about how valuable cards in hand are. Like, some people will just only assess based on the board state, and somebody playing a particular deck that can just win out of nowhere with one card, like a Primal Surge or something. You have to threat assess them based on cards in their hand or what they could do. If they were playing against a blue deck, maybe they could play an Omniscience or something, right? Like, or an extra turn spell and win out of nowhere. It's very hard to know what's coming in Commander. The board state can help you, like, give a general idea, but you can't just only use that.
And I think it's a useful metric for making that decision. If all things are equal, if you're playing with people who you have no idea what's in their deck, or you've never seen the deck before, you have no previous information to go off of, you could maybe, like you have the known information of what's on the board that you can make decisions based off of. But I think even aside from that, there's other things to throw in there. Like amount of mana or like amount of cards in hand. Generally, I'm overly focused on card advantage, and whoever has the most like combined resources, like cards in hand, lands on the battlefield, permanents in play. I mean, usually non-token permanents in play.
Sure, relevant things, yeah.
But that's, I guess the idea of this whole episode is that it's just not always, there's no one-size-fits-all way to make that decision.
Yeah, so sometimes you'll be playing in a Commander game, and you will make the decision that you're actually going to attack or do something, bad to someone who doesn't have a board state at all or whatever. And then sometimes they might get upset and be like, you're making the wrong play. Can't look at the board. Can't you see what's going on? But you really can't boil down Commander to just that. Like, I could be correct, I could be wrong, but it's not very fair to say like that I made the wrong play because I didn't, because I valued things a little bit differently than that player did. And maybe I made the right play. Who knows, right?
Yeah, I think some people would argue that you should take each game as is, like at its face value, and not like carry past experiences with you. And I don't think you should really like hold grudges against people, and it should never be much of a personal thing, but we're learning creatures. People can't help but bring their prejudices with them into each new experience.
Yeah.
And I think in the case of Magic, like we were saying, in competitive Magic, you can know what specific cards somebody might have in their deck because there's a metagame. People are playing archetypes, and you can know deck lists for the most part. People might change that a little bit. Harder to do that in Commander, but there are certain types of cards that people play. Like if I'm playing a deck that commits heavily to the board, and I have the opportunity to take out the person who has 10 cards in their hand in like a Reliquary Tower, but I don't, and then I'm getting board wiped after every time I let them live, like,
you kind of have an
what
idea.
am I supposed to learn from that? What am I supposed to do?
It's like in a in a competitive form, I should say, a constructed format, 60-card constructed format, you're playing around, 4 of their Wrath spell. Whereas in Commander, you're playing around their 6 of different Wrath spells, It's a similar concept.
Yeah, so if you know that your deck is weak to something, and you have reasons based on past experience to suspect that somebody will be able to exploit that, isn't it the correct thing to use that information? I can't think of... I mean, there's definitely times where people will get tunnel vision on that, and I certainly have, where you'll like think about that and be like, oh my god, like this Sultai deck or something, like if they get to their end game, I'm just not going to be able to beat that. So you'll maybe focus them harder than you should because you might not know that their version of the deck is just kind of a little bit worse than you're used to.
You might not understand. You might not know that they just don't have like that kind of value engine inevitability that a lot of decks do.
Yeah, I just think the look at the board state argument and not being allowed to factor in hidden information in the game, I think that favors a certain type of player and a certain type of deck way more heavily than the average commander deck. Like,
and that deck is usually a win from the hand kind of combo centric deck. So, a couple low mana, 2-card combos that you can kind of deploy on the same turn, maybe fast mana stuff like. So I could win off of very little mana or permanents in play if I have a Dockside Extortionist in my hand and a Temur Sabertooth. I can just play them both, get enough mana to do both the things, go infinite. Like, it's not like it favors that kind of deck for sure.
I have a Crush the Bloodbraided deck, which is mostly just big creatures and ramp, and I feel like that deck is usually pretty slow and very fair, but when I play with people, I feel it necessary to mention, because I'm always saying, like, yeah, it's kind of slow, like, I don't feel like this deck is that great, but then I also have to say, well, I have Bolas' Citadel and Selvalis Stampede in this deck. So if I'm able to play one of those, like, on turn 5, I might seem like I was being disingenuous about saying, oh, this deck is slow or, like, it's fair, because there's 2 cards in that deck that just turn that on its head.
Yeah.
Like, if you're playing a very fair or, like, slow deck, but you have Omniscience in your deck, or the Primal Surge, and you can just play that and then get out, like...
Yeah.
Even if you're not going to, like, immediately win, if you get out, like, 20, 30 mana worth of spells.
Yeah, or even something like a Mana Geyser or like a Neheb, the 5-mana Neheb, right? Like, it's the kind, like, they're not as... They're more like just large mana generations or ways to put, like, a lot of mana value of permanents in play, or cards that just outright win the game on, like, for low mana. I think those are the kinds of cards we're talking about.
It's funny you bring up Neheb. I think I've told my story before of a mono blue deck winning from their board state being a Mana Rock and their commander, because they were just able to play extra turn spells for the rest of the game and win, like, from what most people would say, like, look at the board state. They don't have a board. They had not, like, I was playing my Voltron deck. I had a very threatening looking board. I was doing a lot of stuff. Things were going well for me. And then this blue deck just passed to them and they win from practically nothing. I was playing another game earlier this week, and somebody had out, they were behind on lands. They had finally played a Mana Rock, and they played their commander, the 5-mana Neheb. Mm-hmm. And that was their board state. Nothing else. Everyone was doing a lot more. They get to the next turn where they've untapped with a Neheb. They play a Mana Geyser. Mm-hmm. Use that mana to play a burn spell that did like 20 damage to 3 different players.
Yep.
And then second main phase, use that 60 mana that they just got from Neheb.
Second burn spell.
To play a Crackle with Power and kill everybody.
Yeah, I'll do it.
And I feel like every new commander player, like, as much as, like, people might disparage that play style or think, like, oh, that's kind of cheesy, or like, oh, that was cheap, I think people need to see that happen so you have the realization, like, it's not just about the board state. Like, what are we supposed to say? Like I think somebody could say to me, argue to me, like, be like, oh, well, they had the Neheb out, so you should know that that was going to happen. You shouldn't allow them to have Neheb in play, like it's the commander. But the blue commander I was playing against was Arcanus the Omnipotent, taps to draw 3 cards. Should I have known that they were going to chain extra turn spells together? Like, I think that's I think those are very similar stories, like, down to, like, this. They're incredibly similar stories, right?
You have one Mana Rock and your commander out eventually and nothing else. And that's what I think you're saying, Eli. Like it feels like the format, if you're trying to, like, get your edges, the format really does kind of incentivize those kinds of strategies where you can win out of nowhere from not presenting as a threat on board, right? Like, that's well, like you're saying, I think, like, that's where the look at the board state argument kind of crumbles a little bit, because you can't just do that, and some people think that some people weigh it too heavily, I think.
Yeah, I used to think that my red-green Spellslinger deck was, like, a good deck to play to drive home this point, but then I had the realization that the way I built that deck, it puts so many lands into play, and that still is something that people can see. I mean, I feel like people generally, like, don't threat assess based on, like, oh, you have a bunch of lands in play and like no other non-land, like no non-land permanents, so therefore you're a threat because you have some people do. I think people, it's kind of like why people threat assess Smothering Tithe so high, because they're like, I see that you have 10 treasures, and it doesn't matter if the person next to you has just as many lands usually.
I think the better way to word it would just be that I think people don't threat assess the amount of lands or whatever that someone has enough. Like, I think you should generally threat assess the person that, you know, ramps a bunch of times or puts a lot of mana into play more highly than I think most people do. I think it's like one of the more threatening things you can do in Commander, because there's just so many either just one card big mana super impactful things or like a 2-card combo you can string together from your hand that are very threatening.
Yeah, definitely. And it's it definitely presents like you could do something crazy, because then you have to like leave it up to the hidden information aspect of being like, oh, like what do they have in their hand? And if people aren't willing to do that and engage in that, like that theoretical thinking of like, oh, like what could they have? I need to like think around that. Then that deck's always gonna get away with it, because
and sometimes, and maybe this is not a good thing to do, but sometimes if I'm playing like a more tame deck, or even if it's not a more tame deck and I just have like kind of a mid hand, but I'm like ramping a lot or something, you know, sometimes I might even just give that information to my opponent. Sometimes, like if you have like a really bad hand, like it is viable to just show your opponents that you have 3 lands in your hand and nothing else, and you can say like, hey, I could draw something really good, but I could, like, I'll just tell you this, like I'll show you my hand and you can see that I generally don't like that sort of thing, but like you could do that and, you know, kind of get people off your back, because they might be just thinking that you have the gas and gas and gas in your hand.
Yeah, I think I'm generally fine with that, because it's very upsetting if you are like attacking somebody or like interacting with somebody that just has like a ton of lands in play or like just a ton of mana, and they've got like a decent amount of cards in their hand, and they're like, why are you attacking me? Like, I don't have anything. Like, look, that person has like some 1/1s or something.
It's like you could show me your hand or tell me what you have, like if you're being honest, right? And like I wouldn't have to attack you if you want.
Yeah, if that person ends up like having an omniscience in their hand or something, and they're getting upset about being attacked, that rubs me the wrong way quite a bit.
So, you know what? It's a bit of a weird thing, but showing people, giving away hidden information for an advantage is a real thing, because your opponents can actually threat assess you, quote unquote, correctly as not a threat.
Yeah, it upsets me when people get so up in arms about like who's getting attacked, and generally, like, I'll get a little bit salty sometimes, like if I feel like somebody is like spending a card in a way that I don't think is effective for them. Like if they're destroying like if somebody like destroys like my mana rock or something just because they want to play their spell, like that's a little bit annoying, but whatever, it's their call. But like generally just like throwing around damage is like such a free thing to do that like I've had so many instances of people getting upset about getting attacked, and it's just it's frustrating. Like I think one game, this is an example of me having hidden information that people weren't willing to factor in. I wasn't attacking into a deck that had out like some small creatures and some tokens, because I had like my Bruce Tarl that gives the double strike and lifelink, and if you attack into like a 1/1 with Bruce Tarl, first of all you only gain the 3 life, right?
You get half the life because it dies. Yeah.
And I attacked my other friend who was open, and this whole time like he was very upset about getting, because he had like missed some lands, but at the same time he admitted he was playing a very strong deck, certainly stronger than I think the other decks at the table, but he was just having kind of a rough game. So like I understand that, getting frustrated about that, but I at the same time I'm looking at my hand and I've got the what is the 8 mana, gain control of all the creatures.
Yeah. It's slipping my mind for a moment.
But yeah, the 8 mana, steal everyone's creatures, and then they get haste.
You're like, I don't want them to block my stuff.
So I was thinking, like, if I resolve that, like, I'm going to be able to kill these guys if there's more creatures in play.
Yeah.
So that's, maybe think about that.
So yeah, before you jump off to tell somebody that they are making the wrong play, maybe consider that they could have a reason for doing what they're doing. Or maybe they have a thought process in mind, or like a plan.
I think we talked, Spencer, about a recent episode of the hit series Commander Replay, where our friend PJ plays Magic Online with friends, and somebody had a seal of cleansing and used it to destroy PJ's enchantment. Which, as PJ is wont to do, he goes on a little rant about how people don't save their removal well enough, which
you should hold
which I'm sure he wouldn't have said if somebody destroyed something that wasn't his. But then a turn later, that player plays a Hannah Ship's Navigator, which is the white-blue creature that can return artifacts and enchantments from your graveyard to your hand.
Yeah, to your hand.
And PJ kind of has to go, oh, maybe that's what they were thinking. It's like, yeah, maybe it was,
maybe your opponents made decisions for reasons.
Yeah, maybe they had their reasons, and I think and
they could even make a bad decision from their own information, but they might have a thought. You can't just discredit a plan they have or something. Maybe they're doing it because they're I think I might draw this thing that will work, and even though they don't draw it, they still have a thought process usually.
Yeah, there was another instance of me attacking somebody and again got hit with the why are you attacking me thing, which is if somebody wants to attack me generally that's the least of my concern. I was saying, they're not really spending much. You could say you need to use your damage effectively, right? But they're not really taking much from me. Life is such a hefty resource in Commander that if I get hit for 3 or 6, I really don't feel that's worth your energy to complain about.
Yeah, Eli, we have kind of a running joke in our games where you get attacked and you're yeah, I could take 20. That's exactly.
You really can. That's oftentimes not the thing that's really going to kill you. That's not usually how people get beat nowadays.
Although sometimes I've found myself where other people, you do a thing where you set someone to a lower life when they're not a super big threat, so that they're more manageable later in the game. You might be okay, if this guy's at 10 life or 6 life, I don't really need to focus on him, and I know if something goes wrong, I have some outs against them.
I think that's a fair thought. I think it's oftentimes really cool to put somebody at super low life total if you are playing a deck that has any burn spells in it.
Yeah.
So if they get out of hand, you can instant speed go to Boros Charm them or burn lightning bolt them.
And I kind of like that concept because I've played played some decks of mine, and I've realized when I'm playing a combat deck or something that's kind of maybe inadvertently kind of goes shields down sometimes, is willing to take a lot of damage sometimes, right? And I'm just maybe I should actually build some sort of life gain in my deck. I have my Aurelia deck, right? And I'm maybe I should find a way to put one source of lifelink, so I have an option to tutor for a lifelink equipment or something to attack with and maybe gain some life back. Maybe I should play a Heliod's Intervention or something as one source of if that's my issue, I really actually need to gain the life. I feel that's kind of a healthy aspect of Commander where you run into a problem and you're maybe actually I should, maybe life gain isn't the worst, the worst mechanic in the game. It's actually more valuable than you might think. I honestly do believe that.
Yeah, so that game I was talking about, I hit somebody for a little bit of damage, and they were saying why didn't you attack this other person? Meanwhile, I'm looking at a hand with a Chroma's Will, where I was going to be able to just completely destroy that other person without that damage the next turn.
You'd be able to attack through all their blockers.
Yeah, I could have killed them.
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm attacking you, because next turn my thought is I'm just going to, Anthem and kill them, right? Or Overrun or Chroma's Will or whatever, Sarah's Emissary, something like that.
Yeah, I might be skipping ahead on our notes here a little bit, Spencer, but I think the idea here that we want to get at is you generally want to try and give people the benefit of the doubt with why they're doing the things they're doing, and really I think it's hard for me to do that because I'm somebody who's pretty negative and has had life experiences that lead me to believe that generally people aren't making reasonable decisions or looking out for their best interests sometimes.
Yeah.
But
you kind of have to force yourself to do it, right?
Well, you get to know people and you get to know the kind of decisions they make. So if I'm playing games with somebody like Spencer who wins a lot of games and I think is making like good decisions. If he does something that I don't understand, I generally just have to assume that he's doing it for good reasons. And I had really hoped like that I had developed that reputation with certain people. But at the same time, like, you'll still get this, like, oh, like, why are you doing this? Like, why me? Like, and it's like, well, don't you trust me?
Like, wait, come on.
It can be very hurtful, especially amongst your friends or people that you know pretty well if they're constantly questioning you. And, like, maybe that does cause me to introspect sometimes and think, like, man, am I doing the wrong thing? Like, am I bad or something? But, like, I don't know, if you're still like winning like your fair share of games, like I feel like that doesn't lie.
Yeah. And one thing on that similar topic is that I find that when I see a questionable play, I think it's really cool when when you just like let it be, you're like, that was weird. And then a couple turns later, you get that moment of like, I see. I actually really like that moment because it gives me a chance to like give someone their flowers, because it's not that often that I was going to say it's not that often that you get one over on me. No, that's not what I mean. I mean, it's not that often that like, it really just comes together and you're like, wow, that play that you made that I thought was really weird worked out great, and I see what you had. I'm like, oh, I could have actually predicted this if I was a little bit smarter. I could have been like, oh, maybe he has this card, and then you realize it and you're like, wow, that's cool. Mm-hmm. It's really cool when you actually get to like make like a read in a Commander game.
Yeah, and at the same time, though, there definitely are people who are playing Commander for different reasons than we are. Like, we're generally playing to try and win. And, ultimately, people say, like, no, I'm playing for fun. I'm not playing to win. It's like, well, no, I mean, they're not mutually exclusive.
You can do both, yeah.
We're playing for fun, and we're also playing to try and make ourselves win.
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone sees it that way. Some people are simply not concerned with winning.
Sometimes you're just playing cards for the meme of it, Sometimes you're just like, I'm just going to man-tide this random thing for whatever.
Yeah, and that's fine. So you get to know that kind of person. And like, they're not even... It's not just that, like, they're playing poorly. They're just not concerned with doing whatever we decide is objectively correct or optimal.
Yeah.
And if you know that about somebody, then you can be like, oh, that wasn't probably correct, because, they're not... They're not bothered with that.
Yeah, they have different values that they're prioritizing at that moment,
or,
right?
To be honest, if you're playing with somebody who just doesn't know the game super well or isn't super experienced, you can probably guess that they're going to make some mistakes and they're going to do some things that aren't objectively correct. And that's okay.
That's a weird issue because, like, you always have, like, you have like two avenues that you can go with that. One of them is to just like let it happen and not say anything, and the other one is to like try to offer some sort of productive advice. I guess you have the third avenue of just yelling at them, but that's not good. But I never know which avenue to take, because I guess it depends on the person. If there's someone who's like trying to like improve and like really would like the advice, then I think you can go for the advice route. But otherwise, I think it's safer to just kind of let it happen.
You wrote something good here, Spencer, about giving people the benefit of the doubt, and how it doesn't do much good to assume that somebody is actively trying to lose in a game. Like, even if they're doing like a quote, like a bad play, they might have reasons for doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Those reasons might not be very good,
but
like if somebody's attacking you because you have the highest life total, you might not think that's a very good reason. It is a reason.
Yeah,
it's their reason. So
that's information you can factor into your own decisions and your own predictions.
You have to decide. Do you think it is it's your place to like try and teach them some big lesson right there about like why they're wrong? Maybe if you feel like you can do that nicely.
Yeah. So just think about that. Pick your battles and try to be a nice person in general. Try to assume your people you're playing with aren't trying to make you feel bad, because they're usually not.
Yeah, people might just think differently than you.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not always a bad thing. Like I think, Spencer, I've told you about how I built a wizard deck for my little brother, and I built it to be like an aggro wizard deck.
Yeah.
But he is not somebody who plays very aggressively. And so I might feel like he's doing things not how I would do it. Like, he might be doing things incorrectly. But as I played with him, like, he's winning his share of games, and like he's doing well.
Yeah.
And he's even teaching me things because this is applying something I learned, this phrase I learned from my interpersonal communication class. It's be curious, not furious. So if somebody's doing something that is upsetting you, or like you don't understand why they're doing it, you should ask yourself, like, why are they doing this? And like, what are they thinking? And like, try and learn from that rather than just being like, nope, they're wrong. They're doing this wrong. But he's taught me things about that deck that I built the deck and I didn't even like realize. Like, there's this weird card, Ink Fathom Witch, that's it has fear, and it makes it so you can pay 4 mana and make it so all unblocked creatures become base power toughness 4/1 until end of turn.
Mm-hmm.
I put that in there thinking like wizards are pretty small, and this is kind of like a weird like sort of
go wide
mirror entity,
yeah.
kind of like go wide like thing. I didn't realize putting that into that deck that it could be used on your opponent's creatures. So if somebody attacks you with a 10/10, you can use that if it's unblocked and make it a 4/1. And then you can sacrifice a creature to Goblin Bombardment and shoot it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a card I put in there to be aggressive, and because he thinks differently than I do. Not that he thinks about things worse than I do. He discovered something that I hadn't even thought of.
Yeah, that's very cool.
So I think that's a good thing, especially with people like my brother, who I consider a very smart person, that you should try and practice that with people who you trust and your friends. Be curious, not furious, and even strangers where you can. But I understand how that's a lot harder, because you might assume something about the average Magic player and the average Commander player,
and you might want to be careful with what you assume about the average player.
But yeah, you shouldn't write people off too. Like, you've got to just try and give people the benefit of the doubt. It is really goddamn hard sometimes. But
yeah.
You can learn things from it.
And you know, speaking of that, it's hard to like essentially expect the unexpected, right? Like, you can't. It's not easy. So I don't know. Why don't we talk about some ways that we can just do things about all of this? Like, how do we improve ourselves? How do we, you know, you were talking about giving people the benefit of the doubt. I'm saying expect the unexpected. What other ways are there to just not kind of break out of our own you know, mental state and kind of understand other people?
Well, something that I've been thinking about recently, and something that's very frustrating about Commander, is Commander is probably the only format of Magic where it is possible for somebody in your game playing worse to negatively affect you.
Yeah.
Because in 1v1, if your opponent plays worse than you do, you're winning that game, right?
Yeah.
Generally, unless
or you have an advantage or whatever, right?
It's it's a net positive.
Yeah.
But it's frustrating Commander how like you can feel like, and this is the classic thing of somebody being like, oh, like your threat assessment was bad, I just lost because that person was being dumb or something, they're playing poorly. But and that's something that frustrates me sometimes, is thinking like, oh, I just lost because everyone decided that like my mana rocks were too threatening, or like my small creature that was attacking or like generating me some small amount of value was
more threatening than or it was more threatening to them than you thought it would be.
But I think you need to retrain your brain to think like, how can I, because an opponent playing slightly worse than you, that should be an advantage. You need to think like, how can I exploit that?
Yeah.
And be like, what can I do to like, what am I doing wrong that's making them like do this stuff to me? Or like, is there any way that I can try and like maneuver that?
Mm-hmm.
And you shouldn't like lie to people, but yeah, it's just it's kind of led me to more of the approach. They were talking about this on a Command Zone probably a couple months ago now, about how like the generally understood like best way to win more games of Commander is just to like sandbag stuff so that you're not the first person to like do threatening things.
Yeah.
And just allow people like overreact to that first person and then sneak in afterwards. And I've been trying to do that more often, because before that I was more like the kind of person I was like, no, I'm just going to try anyways.
Just going to play my cards.
Yeah, I'm not going to sandbag. I'm just going to like do what I want to do, and like what happens. And sometimes you can fight through that. Generally, if you can fight through that, it's probably a sign that you're playing something a little bit too strong, but
yeah.
But that's what I would try and do.
Well,
and I would get frustrated when I would get stopped, and I wouldn't ever think like, what am I doing wrong here?
Yeah, well, even on a similar note, like you were talking about how like some players might have different thoughts about like what's threatening to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like there could be a situation where someone like is thinking that you are a threat just because you have the potential to, let's say, attack them with your commander a couple times. Like maybe they have eight commander damage on them, and they're worried that you could maybe like one shot them with commander damage or something, right? Like you can alleviate, like if you we're not huge politics guys, but you could like just say like, I'm not going to kill you with commander damage this game, and that's my like I'm making that deal with you or something, and you don't, and now they're suddenly like not going to do something bad that they were otherwise planning on doing. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's an avenue you could go if you wanted to. So so I would actually encourage you, if you're like unsure about what to do about something in the game, like you're like really worried about something, you could just like be open with what you're worried about and bring it up to the person and say, how can we work around this? Because like I'm really worried that this thing is going to happen, and like I feel like if I feel like I got to do something, and they're just like, oh no, that's actually not something to be worried about right now. Like,
Something that I've worked on and gotten over is I'm like overly card advantage focused. So if I'm generally not a big fan of using like single target removal on things. If I can help it, it doesn't feel good. But if I would see like somebody's Thrasios or like something that like slowly got them card advantage, I would have to be like in my brain like, oh, I need to destroy that right now because that generates them more resources. And nowadays, that's just like everything.
That's every card, yeah.
It's not reasonable. Like board wipes are still good for dealing with stuff like that most of the time. But
we're at a point where it's not reasonable to single target remove everything that's good.
I've let that go because I've played with people, and you see this a lot in Commander. Like somebody plays like anything that's like pretty good. Like sometimes even it is like something like objectively
play
pretty
like
scary.
A Rhystic Study or a Smothering Tithe or something good,
and people
right?
will be like, that needs to go like right away, and like they will have to like, if they have removal, like they're using it like the second something like that generates value, or like something that's like kind of a big-ish creature.
Yeah.
Like that's gotta go. You can't have that. And it's like, man, I just feel like you can't manage everything. So like
you have to pick your battles and just let people do strong things sometimes. It's hard.
You just have to let everyone kind of like get to that boiling point, like just hope that like you're keeping pace with that. And
yeah.
You can't deal with everything.
Mm-hmm. It's hard.
So yeah, why even try? You don't want to be the person who's like trying to table police everything that happens, because you're going to be in a pretty bad position after that probably.
Yeah, and also like I think one thing that's a big important aspect of this is a lot of people will, say things about like, oh, that was the wrong play. I would have made this play. There is an objectively correct play. But they don't really realize that they are not infallible. They can be wrong too, right? Sometimes people like try to justify their plays, like retroactively. They're like, oh yeah, I did this because of this reason. And they like have no understanding in their mind that there could potentially be another play to make there. Like they're just like, yes, I don't want to throw too much shade, but you see this sometimes in like CDH games. CDH players, they'll be like, this is the right play here because of X, Y, and Z reason, right? And they might even have like a good reasons for it, but it seems like some of them seem to hyper fixate on like one decision that they kind of just arbitrarily decide is right. Like when I say arbitrarily, I guess that's not arbitrary because they have reasons for it, but like there are other hypotheses that could be equally as possible, and it feels like sometimes you turn a blind eye to them.
Yeah, you can find a reason for just about anything you do, but if you're coming up with that reason after the fact, I feel like that's not really the reason you did it.
Well, even if you think of it before, you're just like, you're not like an ultimate logic machine, and you make mistakes sometimes too. That's all I'm saying. So don't be at the most confident when things are complicated.
There's a phrase that goes something along the lines of humans are not rational creatures, we're rationalizing creatures. Mm-hmm. So we don't act completely logically. We're good at coming up with reasons for the things that we do. And people have to do that because it keeps us sane, I guess.
Yeah. Well, we've been talking about how, like, there's almost no, like, objectively correct play. Like, I mentioned this earlier in the podcast at the very start, where I was like, I don't think there can necessarily be an objectively right play in a lot of situations. And that's because Commander is such a complex format compared to traditional formats that it's just like exponentially more complex, like for 4 different reasons. And like there's one where it's like, it's multiplayer, so that's going to like exponentially increase the complexity. It's a 100 card singleton format, so that also exponentially increases the complexity. And then there's like the political nature of like, maybe not everyone's trying to win all the time, or people have like their own things they're trying to do. Maybe people are like trying to achieve a certain thing in a game, or they're making deals. All these things make Commander so complex that I don't think a computer could figure out the correct play all the time.
Yeah, the multiplayer and like deal making aspect of Commander makes it so freaking crazy, because like I have some good conversations like with my brother after playing cards. Like if we have a game where we lost, we'll have to like think like, what could we have possibly done to win this game? There was a game, I gotta have a low moment of confession of a time when I wasn't playing strictly for my own benefit to win a game. I was playing in a game with some friends and my brother had the card Triskaidekaphile. And throughout the game, he was constantly trying to win with it. And I was playing a friend's deck where I got board wiped. And there was I felt like there was no chance of me winning that game with everything else that was going on. And I just wanted the game to end because I was having a bad time at this point. And the other players had used some removal on like some of my stuff that I didn't think was super great. So I was feeling a little bit spiteful. And this wasn't a good thing to do. But I got to the point where I only had the option pretty much to stop the player before me from killing my brother so it could get to my turn and I could possibly pass the turn to my brother and just let him win with the Triskaidekaphile, because I was like, fuck this game, I just want this to be done. There's no way I'm winning it. I was about to king make pretty bad, but as soon as I was about to do that, after I saved my brother, one of the players sounded just very exasperated and and I was like, you know what, this was not fair to him for me to do that. So eventually I got back to my turn. I could have killed my brother, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna kill him, but now, because it's my choice, if I kill him, you guys can't attack me this next turn. But if you don't agree to this, if you don't give me what I want, if you don't meet my terrorist demands, I'll just let him win the game.
Based.
And that was a very, very messy kind of deal, but I had to rationalize why I would make that play that I did, and not just say that I was letting my brother win the game.
Yeah.
In a way that made sense for me, even though I didn't end up asking for a lot. Still lost that game anyways, but I had to come up with the reason why I had done that. And that was just such a weird situation that it's so hard to know what you should have done there, because what do you do when you have no opportunity to win a game of Commander?
Yeah.
What's the decision then? What's objectively correct?
Mm-hmm.
Who do you decide to you get put in this position where you have to kingmake people? How do you decide what's the correct thing there?
Yeah.
There isn't a decision, right?
It's hard.
What are you supposed to do?
It's impossibly hard, I would even say. But yeah, so I've kind of stated that I don't think we can get to objectively correct in Commander really at all for most things. But there are some things that, some people... Well, there's some things that maybe are kind of close to objectively correct. And there are also some things that some people think are objectively correct that maybe we disagree with. So let's start by talking about a couple things that usually, mostly, not exactly objectively correct, or most of the time is good to do that maybe some people don't think so. And that's... The very first thing that comes to my mind, Eli, is drawing cards when you have to discard to hand size, or looting and stuff like that. And there'll be players who think that I don't want to loot because I'm gonna lose a card, or I don't want to draw an extra card. Because
all my cards are good, so I don't want to have to discard a card. But it's if that's the case, you just discard the card that you just drew off the looting. So you're not ever losing. You're gaining nothing but new information
and potential of graveyard, synergy, stuff like that. And it's almost always I would consider looting on at any time is probably objectively correct if given the option.
And with all these things that we're going to talk about, there are really weird edge cases where you could argue that you shouldn't do stuff like this. Like, somebody could, devil's advocate, be like, oh, if you're looting and you like discard like a creature or something, what if your opponent like plays a deck that steals your creature?
What if I'm playing against a mill deck and I don't want to, I don't want to help them mill me, whatever. It's like, yeah, sure, but like generally, not for the reasons that.
It's kind of the point of this episode, right? Is like there's going to be situations where like you can't always say like 100% of the time this thing is the truth. Like, one thing we didn't really want to like get into in this section is like playing your land every turn. Like, that's a pretty obvious thing.
Yeah, you should play your land, yes.
Generally, in Magic, the way that priority works, it's almost always the correct thing to, like, wait until the last possible moment to do something.
Yeah.
Another example I have for this was, mentioned my brother a lot in this episode, but he's been somebody I've been playing a lot of Commander with, spending a lot of time with. He had a Warstorm Surge in play and 2 opponents at 1 life. He had a card in his hand that could return one of his wizards to play from the graveyard, and his commander's a Nala. So with that, he was going to be able to win with that Warstorm Surge.
To get 2 people.
But in this deck, also as a bit of a meme, because I just put in a bunch of like random like wizard spells kind of for flavor, we have Lightning Bolt in that deck. And of course, if you can kill somebody with Lightning Bolt, you want to kill them with a Lightning Bolt for the style points, right?
Yeah.
So my brother goes to kill the first person with his Lightning Bolt. So he main phase, stack empty, casts a Lightning Bolt targeting a player. This player on the way out, if you got a thing to do, you may as well use it. Like, you got to, hurt your opponent on the way out. He goes to play a Beast Within on the Warstorm Surge.
Mm-hmm.
So now, because my brother played the Lightning Bolt, if he didn't have if the thing that he got, like, his wizard back, like, didn't, like, give it haste, or, like, he didn't have, like, or if they had blockers or something, like, maybe he wouldn't have been able to win without that Warstorm Surge. So him having that Warstorm Surge, if he had waited for that player to Beast Within him and in response Lightning Bolted the player, that would have removed the Beast Within from the stack. And I talked to him about that afterwards, and he was just like, oh, I just didn't realize that like killing somebody removes their spells from the stack. I'm like, that's totally fair.
Yep.
He won anyways, so like he still had like a couple layers of redundancy for his plan, but just generally I was like, hey, just if you can, the Lightning Bolt is going to be really good in these situations because you can effectively use it as a counter spell. Yeah.
Well, so there's another thing with that is like you don't always want to wait as long as possible to do something. Like if you don't, like, let's say there's like a problem creature in play, right? Like you don't necessarily want to wait until the opponent's going to use it to do the bad thing. You might want to wait for other opportunities. You want to you might have like certain windows on when you should. Like some danger windows. So, for example, you might want to use your interaction while the player's tapped out. So you might want to like do it like right before they go to their turn, right? Like that's like the last possible moment to do some things.
Yeah, or if I'm gonna want to use my removal spell on that Thrasios, I'm gonna want to do it before they untap with their mana and are able to activate it to effectively replace their card.
Yeah. You might want to act before a player is able to draw a card off a Ristic Study, maybe in response to a trigger or something, right?
Oh man, I feel like we've all been gotten by that before, where you go to like fuck with the Ristic Study player and they draw into the counter spell.
Yeah, or even they're asking if the person asks if you want to let do this trigger before or after the Ristic Study. You always want to do your thing before they get the card draw, for sure. Also, I mean, some other things, like maybe there's like once per turn effects. Like there's a lot of cards they printed recently that have like a once per turn effect. So maybe you want to interact with certain things on a turn where they've already gotten a once per turn effect, so they can't like maybe somehow get another one. I don't know exactly, but just some things to keep in mind. There's windows of when you might want to use your stuff, and you usually want to wait as long as you can in that window. Mm-hmm. Because someone else might deal with it for you, or there's less. They might spend their mana on something else that they could have maybe used to protect it, and now they don't have that access to that anymore. Another thing, Eli, is something that I'm sure you love this a lot, Eli, is trading life for resources. We had a classic conversation, I think, on one of our episodes, probably 20 episodes ago, on like just theoretically, like. Hypothetical, let's say you could just like start the game with 8 cards in your hand, but you like lose some amount of life to do that. Like, how much life would you pay for just that one extra card on turn 1? And I think I don't remember what we said, but like probably like between 10 and 20 life, right? Would you say that?
I'm just super greedy is the thing, yeah.
Bro, I think I'd pay like 10 life to draw a card on like turn 1, honestly. It's weird. Maybe that's a little bit crazy. I might be going a little too crazy on that, but
I play real fast and loose with my life total. I mean, I feel like I've won and seen people win with less than 10 life at the end of a game in Commander so many times, to the point where I just think, like, man, like, it almost didn't matter sometimes, because it is rare that, like, somebody's playing like that lightning bolt in Commander.
Yeah.
So you can stabilize. Like, I have a deck all about, like, getting down to 1 life and winning with near death experience. It is very hard to win from 1 life in Commander, I'll give you that. But even like around like 10 in that deck, I'm usually feeling very safe.
You actually win with that deck more than I think a lot of people think. You actually do manage to be able to get people with that deck more than you would expect.
It's tough because there's a lot of things that can get you, but like still like that. I think that deck or like that kind of strategy like proves a point of being like hey, like you can actually like get by in this game with very little life. Like,
yeah.
Some things are going to kill you, but, you know.
You throw out a Villas and you draw 20 cards, whatever.
Yeah, like, if you're willing to spend that life. And so this is mostly just the idea of, like, I feel like I see a lot of people get attacked for, like, 3 to 5 damage, and they have, like, a 1/1 or something that can't, like, trade with the creature. They're like, yeah, I'll block.
And sometimes that's good.
Yeah, like, especially, like, if you know, like, you have a board wipe in your hand, or you suspect somebody else it might be time to, like, board wipe. That's something that I'm really bad at, is not blocking, like, the turns before somebody plays a board wipe. And obviously, like, how could I know somebody's going to have a board wipe? But then they play the board wipe, and I'm like, oh, I may as well have blocked.
Yeah. So sometimes, like, you know, you say you might chump block 5 damage, but then you didn't consider the fact that potentially that blocker could have chump blocked, 10 damage the next turn or something, right? Like, right. Prevent something else. So you really want to kind of min-max the best value you can get out of your cards. Maybe taking the 4 damage or 5 damage right now is going to be more valuable for you because of what it represents in the future.
So yeah, if you can avoid just throwing away your creatures for not a great reason, spend your life total. You got 40 of it. Like that's a lot.
It's a lot.
That's a lot to spend. Like we were saying, like, yeah, I can take 10, I can take 20.
Yeah, sure.
You really can.
Mm-hmm.
You can, because, like, man, I'm happy, Spencer, to be killed by good old-fashioned combat damage in Commander.
Yeah. You do have to factor in, though, if you know what your opponents are playing. Like, yes, when your opponent is playing a Perforos deck, you might want to consider saving your life total.
Yeah, there's definitely decks.
Or Yuriko,
And definitely, like, decks and players and play styles that really teach you. You gotta respect your life total, so because it is a resource. So don't just like spend it freely, but it's there to be used.
Yeah. In those games, maybe don't spend 10 life for a card, right? Maybe don't do that. Maybe
that's something I gotta be careful with, like my Castle Lockthwain, because that's definitely one that'll.
Yeah, you use your Castle Lockthwain. It's like, I got 7 in my hand, but I'm trying to hit a land drop, so.
My War Room, though, I'll use that thing down to like 4 life. Like, I don't care.
And I do this with like Ancient Tomb too. I'm like, yes, this game I am taking 15 damage from my lands. Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
One thing I wanted to talk about, it's not something that's oftentimes objectively correct, but I wanted to give an example of something that people might debate and argue about that's not really an example of something tied to threat assessment in a game of Commander. And that's the idea. You'll hear people a lot, like you'll play like an old card, like maybe you have an update in a deck or something, and somebody will be like, why are you playing that? Why are you playing that card? Why aren't you playing this instead? And oftentimes the reason is just I haven't updated it, or I just can't afford that card. Like there's plenty of good reasons outside of the game. But some people can make the argument, like, for example, a friend of the show, Bradley, that we've had on a podcast episode and a tier list episode, has this philosophy of Commander that if you're playing cards that many people view as suboptimal or less strong, they appear much less threatening, and therefore people are much less likely to spend single target removal on those cards.
Yeah, we had an episode called The Strength of Weakness or something like that.
Yes.
So if you're interested, you can hear more about that. But that is that. Yeah, but there's a novelty to that concept where it is honestly a strategy you can go. Now, you probably don't want to forego playing at least decent or good cards, but maybe don't play Ristic Study all the time, because that is a card that will get removed if possible, versus another source of card advantage, which maybe is more reasonable, maybe like a the Armasaur, the Armasaur green creature.
Yeah, and I respect Bradley's philosophy on this, because this is a strategy that plays off of the fact that people do use their previous learned information from games in their threat assessment to decide, like, oh, I've seen that card do this crazy thing, or I've seen Ristic Study draw like 10 cards. People know stuff about certain cards and what they're going to do, whereas if you're playing a card that does a very similar thing, but it's just not, it doesn't have like the name value, like most people can put that together, but there's not like that immediately like
visceral response.
Yeah,
right?
There's not the sirens ringing and people being like, oh my god, they've got a Shieldred the Apocalypse out or something.
It's
or
like
Praetor.
Pattern recognition, right? Like you don't like, it doesn't bring back your memory. Oh yeah, I remember this time where this card went crazy and won the game. Yeah,
exactly. And Bradley, he'll get by you on that every time, and it's he just takes it down to the strength of his plays, and he thinks, I'm playing worse cards, but if I play better than other people and I manipulate like their biases, that's an edge that I can get. And I think that's so cool.
On a similar note, like that, I feel that way a lot, because I've been, like, we've been on a break for a little bit, and I've been a little bit out of Commander a little bit, so I haven't kept up with all these new cards that have been coming out the past 6 months or so, right? And sometimes they make really strong cards that I just haven't seen before, and when I see them for the first time, I might not immediately assess them correctly. Like, I might just be like, oh yeah, that seems good. I'm like, wait, and then something happens, and I'm like, oh wait a minute, that's like really good.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe new cards, maybe playing newer cards can help with that. Trying out some new stuff that maybe your play group hasn't seen. Not saying to just constantly be changing your deck all the time, because that can get annoying and difficult. But
I feel you on that one though, Spencer, because I used to keep up so well with every new Magic set, specifically the Boros cards, but
yeah.
Nowadays there's so much product coming out. I see a new thing and somebody tells me what it does, and I'll just be like, fine.
Yeah, like Eli, I saw you play. There's like a 6-mana red Soulbound creature or Soulbond creature that makes copies of the both itself and the Soulbonded creature at the beginning of combat or when it attacks.
The best thing about that cycle, Spencer?
Yeah,
that card is not in a standard set.
Mm-hmm.
It's not in a Commander Precon.
Yeah.
It is in the set booster Commander set for Innistrad, Crimson Vow, and Midnight Hunt.
Yeah.
I think.
So no, that card I think is really strong, but I hadn't seen it before in a game until you played it against it recently, and I don't know if I had anything that I could have done about it, but I definitely didn't think it was going to do as much as it did. So it was very good, and I learned that. So that's fun.
Yeah, and that's just that's another little edge you can get. So I think I don't know if we're going to talk about like what is objectively correct in Commander. I'm just of the opinion like if you can make a good argument for anything that you do that gives you some edge towards winning your games, because if we're going to also, I think we should kind of define like what does objectively correct mean in this? Like to me it means doing the thing that will give you the best chance at winning your game. You think that's a fair like way to how most people probably see that?
Probably, I mean, as good as any definition, probably.
Because I mean, people definitely do a lot of stuff in Commander, like we were talking about. Some people just aren't concerned with winning, and if they're doing something because it's fun for them, I can't say that like they're being incorrect, but like from the gameplay perspective, I guess we could say that's maybe suboptimal or incorrect if you want to win the game.
Yeah.
But not everyone's concerned with that.
Yeah, so I think that's mostly, we've covered most of what we wanted to say about this topic. Is there anything that I'm forgetting about, Eli, that you can think of to mention?
Just that it's good to develop like your personal philosophy on why you do the things you do in Commander, like especially if you're wanting to win games, and like you can have like a template for like a decision tree maybe of like how like I decide who's winning this game or who I should attack or who I should use my removal on, but there's gonna be edge cases and situations where that you just have to throw that out the window. You have to like you can't go on autopilot with it.
Don't treat your opponents like NPCs that just have like one, dialogue tree and decision tree that they're going through. Like they might change their thought process as well. So it just...
All I'm saying is if I know that somebody does that the same way every single game, if they refuse to take an action against the person who has fewer permanents in play than another person, regardless of what those permanents are, I'm going to exploit that.
Exactly.
Like, that's just... You need to get outside of that mindset of being like, oh, this is always the case, this is always how it should be done, and like this is the objectively correct way to do this, because it's usually not going to be.
Yeah. Well, I mean, is there anything else you want to talk about, Eli? Or is that wrap up a show?
Well, you know what's one thing I wanted to mention on the little outro? We used to do this bit talking about some recent drama and stuff in the Magic community, and there's definitely a lot to pick from lately, but I just wanted to do a short little, not with specific examples, but you know what's always the objectively incorrect thing to do?
What?
Bully Sheldon.
That's true.
Of the Rules Committee.
We stand Sheldon here for sure.
Because I think he's a good person. I think he's proven that. Like we were talking about, like you can, as far as people's decisions, if you know that somebody's developed a reputation for doing the right thing and doing good things, you have to assume that they're trying to do the right thing. And so seeing people misinterpret Sheldon's words and think that he's trying to defend racists, or because there's been a debate and a discussion. The recent Lord of the Rings set came out, and it's an interpretation. So Aragorn is a black man now. And certain Magic players have a big issue with that. And I'm not going to get into our opinions or discuss this issue, but Sheldon is somebody very progressive, and he will not suffer a racist. You know that about Sheldon.
He's been very vocal about that.
But he made a tweet along the lines of, because while this was also happening, there's been discussion about the mechanical and like flavor aspects of the set that some people, like Lord of the Rings fans and Magic players, have been debating about, and it has nothing to do with the Aragorn thing, but it's separate discussion about the Lord of the Rings set. And Sheldon made a tweet saying, just like everyone, kind of be nice to each other, be civilly discuss this stuff. And it's unfortunate that these two discourses were happening at the same time, because I can understand why somebody might think Sheldon was talking about the Aragorn thing, but if you know him and you allow him to explain himself,
or you've read his other tweets,
and you've read his other statements about that specific incident, he doesn't think that. He doesn't think that you should be having civil discussions about about racism and Magic and allowing people to say hateful things.
So it's very frustrating because it feels like we've tweeted about this a couple times over the year. It's just like everyone loves just shitting down Sheldon's throat, and he, for the most part, is very receptive and very kind to them. There's maybe been one or two times where he's like matched energy with people just coming after him incessantly, and I think that's totally fair. But for the most part, he takes the high road, and I think it's pretty bad. And places like Reddit and Twitter will give him a lot of shit for a lot of times they'll just misinterpret or like misconstrue things that he writes, and sometimes they'll just take very big moral issues with what is in fact a personal opinion that he has that doesn't necessarily speak for the rules committee or what the direction of the game. Mm-hmm. So, and people just should lay off Sheldon. He's a good guy.
Yeah. He's a good man. You're a good man, Sheldon.
So yeah,
he does not deserve 1/10 the hate that he gets, I don't think.
Especially
wouldn't wish that on anybody.
As much of a public figure as he is, many people would quit long time ago after receiving all the hate that Sheldon got.
I just want everyone, please understand. I can understand why somebody might be confused as to what his intentions were with that tweet, because, like I said, it's unfortunate that these two separate things were happening at the same time.
Yeah.
But please understand that is not what he meant.
It's not even not what he meant. It's not what he said.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, so, keep on rocking in the free world, and thanks for watching our
yeah,
podcast.
We're going to try and get more episodes out soon and get back in the saddle. And please give us a comment. Let us know. The comments are what would keep me going and
they drive
me want to do this. And so aside from that, it's fun, So please like the video, subscribe, and we'll see you guys again hopefully sooner than 5 months.
Hopefully a couple weeks from now.
Yeah.